Glastonbury has long been a place of wonders, and I don't just mean the past 50 years or so, since the festival at nearby Worthy Farm began. When we first came across this Somerset town some 40 years ago, the commercial exploitation of the beliefs of the free thinking had just begun to infiltrate the high street, with a dozen or so small shops selling joss sticks, kaftans and crystals. Peddling their wares in tiny premises to those who came to the festivals and decided this was a place of magic and mystery and decided to stay, perhaps. Some are probably still here. There are more tye-dyed patchwork coats and trousers and tops per head in Glastonbury than in any other place not on the hippie trail across the Indian subcontinent. Now, we visited most recently a week or so after the festival, and some of the customers thronging today's range of shops may have extended their stay in the area, but Glastonbury certainly has a full-time population of those who've adopted the mystical faith in magic, crystals, meditation, peace and love, to say nothing of the joy of the odd spliff. And of course, the years have passed for many of them, as they have for the rest of us, I suppose, and there is now a distinctly grey tinge, shall we say, to the ponytails, and the faces are lined with more wisdom than before. I suspect that many of the townspeople of Glastonbury back in the day expected the gaudy, loose-fitting clothes and their shaggy occupants to have grown up and perhaps moved away, but they haven't. They've stayed, and they've turned the pretty little town under the Tor into a very successful, very commercial tourist destination. Not that this is anything new to Glastonbury, which has been selling myths and legends for more than 1,000 years. Glastonbury Abbey, or Glastonbury Abbey as the old audio tape used to say as you toured it, is in the heart of the town, and it claims to be the earliest Christian monastic site in Britain. Now, that was a claim taken with a large pinch of salt, given that Scotland's Iona settlement was 2 centuries earlier than the founding of the Abbey in the 7th century, and Canterbury claims a monastic settlement before that. But research is a wonderful thing, and archaeologists have discovered the graves of a small community of monks at Beckery Chapel, close to Glastonbury, that dates apparently from the 4th century and could well be the first in Britain. So Glastonbury were telling the truth from the start. But if you think the claims made by the sellers of today's witchcraft tools, healing crystals and books of hidden secrets of the magical arts are a bit extreme, they have nothing on the old monks of Glastonbury when it comes to making wild and wonderful claims to attract the cash of the believers. Now, the Abbey was famous well before the Normans invaded, and their Domesday Book identified it as the wealthiest abbey in England. The tradition of tall tales that the faithful want to believe started early, with a claim that Joseph of Arimathea, no less, travelled to Britain, in fact to Glastonbury, and became the first Christian bishop, and in the Isle of Avalon, no less. Now, this is the person, for those without a biblical education, who, some claim, took the body of Jesus from the cross and placed it in the grave from which he later came back from the dead. So a sort of central figure in the whole Christian mythology. And this ties in nicely with another legend that Joseph receives the Grail from an apparition of Jesus and sends it with his followers to Britain. And that, of course, feeds in turn into the legend of King Arthur. And guess what? Glastonbury's monks not only claim to have a thorn bush descended from the staff that Joseph of Arimathea planted at Glastonbury when he first arrived from the Middle East, but also laid claim to having discovered the grave of King Arthur, no less. In the 12th century, they built a large tomb for the bones they claimed that belonged to the old king inside the Abbey, and of course that encouraged yet more visitors and pilgrims. Money, money, money. Now, although that was destroyed along with much of the Abbey itself when Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries, you can still see a sign today claiming to mark the site of the reburied bones. Glastonbury Abbey still does absolutely nothing to damage the myths which have surrounded it for centuries. As the guide explains, the Abbey attracts visitors from around the globe, keen to discover the history, heritage, myths, legends and spirituality of the nationally important ancient monument. In fact, the Abbey, having been in private hands since Henry VIII's time, was bought in 1905 and offered to the Church of England at cost. The church raised the necessary funds, and now the Abbey is run by a sort of arm's length charity and a board of trustees. The charity says it preserves the fabric and grounds of Glastonbury Abbey ruins, provides education in the Abbey's religious and historic importance for the public benefit, and uses the Abbey to advance religion in accordance with the doctrines of the Church of England. But like the rest of the town, the Abbey still plays heavily on the myths and the legends exploited by the canny abbots of previous centuries, with a nice gloss of spirituality that avoids offending specific faiths and beliefs, whether they're witchcraft or Buddhism or whatever thrives on the streets outside. But it's one of the things I enjoy about Glastonbury. Everybody's happy to shelter under the civilised cloak of spirituality. And the Wiccans don't slag off the Christians any more than the crystal gazers have a go at the Buddhists. They all thrive, in fact, side by side, and the visitor sort of knows that the noisy, bustling and clearly thriving streets of Glastonbury are not that different than they were when the sellers of pilgrims' medals and saints' finger bones or pieces of the true cross jostled for customers around the gates of the great Abbey. There is a common purpose amongst those who profit from the beliefs of others. I like to think that when the monks worshipped in the Abbey and their abbot entertained royally in his great hall, fed from his great kitchen, which was always plentifully supplied with meat and produce from the massive Somerset estates the Abbey possessed, there was also the equivalent of the excellent Knight's Fish and Chip restaurant close to the Abbey wall. Whatever they cooked up in medieval days, deep-fried carp perhaps. And there was also a first-class cider being brought in by the medieval counterpart of today's cider maker extraordinary, Roger Wilkins, from the slopes of the Mendip Hills. Glastonbury has that effect on you. It gives you a sense of permanence and a feeling that this is a special place that has ridden the tides of time with no little ingenuity, invention and enterprise. It has drawn us back many times over the years to the scenery. There's something about that big cone of rock sticking out of the Somerset levels, with a tower on the top, visible for miles and miles. For the history, I mean, this really is a place where myths were made, or at least made up. And the unashamed commercial business that carries on. I'm sure today's shop owners have the blood of the merchant guildmasters in their veins. And above all, the relaxed happiness of the people, local and visiting, who all seem to have been chilled out by simply being in the town. All hail Glastonbury, place of myths and legends.